Today, we're going to be focusing more specifically on the TIP, the Transition Integrity Project. Some prediction taking place here, but it's based on facts and relevant information surrounding all of this. And as always, hopefully you will think for yourself about how this appears. But we're talking about specifically Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, be more specifically, and how all of this continues to be seeded towards this one location and the prep for some chaos that is seemingly inevitable according to the mainstream media. Today in Whitney's research, again, seemingly one of the few only out there covering this, is continuing to lay this out. And I have to say off the bat, the things that she's been predicting so far have continued to come true. So thank you for once again being here today, Whitney, so we can go over this research and try to wake some people up.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is our last installment of the election special, and it may actually be the most important in terms of what we're likely to see, not just in Philadelphia, which they're framing as the epicenter, but also in cities and states throughout the country, because a lot of the people involved in planning this chaos to make Philadelphia the ground zero of 2020 election, chaos or whatever, are intimately involved in various other states throughout the country and major cities, particularly with a focus on battleground states. So this is definitely something I want to stress. It's not going to be exclusive to Philadelphia, but they're definitely framing it as that particular city being their epicenter, which is their buzzword that they're using to refer to it. So this is my website, a republication of part 3 of my Cyber Reason series, which was originally published by Mint Press News when I was working there. So as you can see here, the title is How Government and Media Are Prepping America for a Failed 2020 Election, published January 28, 2020. That's how obvious this was if you were paying attention to what intelligence was saying, U.S. intelligence. So I start off this, I didn't highlight this, but I think it's a really important quote just in general, given what the situation the country is facing. So as World War I drew to a close in Europe, British philosopher Bertrand Russell wrote that, quote, "Neither a man nor a crowd nor a nation can be trusted to act humanely or to think sanely under the influence of a great fear." I would find that very instructive, not just in explaining how 9/11 was used to push through a lot of things that would have normally been unpopular, but how what we're seeing now, this election chaos, keep in mind that it serves a purpose, and that chaos is designed to keep you from thinking normally, and to the benefit of the people who have been planning and gaming this out for years at this point. In the intro, I write, over the past several months, remember I wrote this in the end of January of this year, so I'm talking about 2019. Over the past several months and with a renewed zeal in just the last few weeks, anonymous U.S. intelligence officials, dubious experts, and establishment media outlets have crafted a narrative about the coming quote-unquote chaos of the 2020 election months before it even takes place. Per that narrative, certain state actors will use specific technologies to target the quote-unquote American mind in order to undermine the coming presidential election. That narrative holds that those efforts will be so successful that the U.S. will never recover as a democracy. Okay. Right, so some of the headlines that came out last year that seeded these types of narratives included, hackers are coming for the 2020 election and we're not ready. Basically, every U.S. national security leader is warning about foreign interference in the 2020 election, and U.S. intelligence agencies say Russia and China plotting to interfere in 2020 election. And if you actually read the statements from those national security leaders and U.S. intelligence officials at the time, they say, as we'll see here in a moment, no evidence that interference is taking place. They just suspected it will, and lo and behold, their warnings are right, per themselves. So anyway, so media and intelligence foreshadowed tech-powered doom for 2020. So this all really kicked off last November, Cyber Reason simulation also that month. And a lot of these media articles we'll be looking at from around the same time frame too. There was a statement issued by Attorney General Bill Barr, Defense Secretary Mark Esper. This is a joint statement. The acting DHS Secretary, who's not there anymore. Acting Director of National Intelligence, who's also not there anymore. Director of the FBI, Christopher Wray. Director of the NSA, Paul Nakasone. I think that's how you say his last name. Hopefully I'm not wrong. And CISA Director, Chris Krebs, who we talked a lot about in video too. And if you, I mean, if you want to know what's going on with the hacking narrative they're rolling out now in a big way for hospitals in the election, and the guy that's supposed to be guarding all that is Chris Krebs, you're really going to, I highly recommend going back and watching video too. It is a total Fox guarding the henhouse situation with him in charge. Anyway, what that statement said about alleged foreign interference in the 2020 election reads as follows, quote, our adversaries want to undermine our democratic institutions, influence public sentiment, and affect government policies. Russia, China, and Iran and other foreign malicious actors all will seek to interfere in the voting process or influence voter perceptions. Adversaries may try to accomplish their goals through a variety of means, including social media campaigns, directing disinformation operations, or conducting disruptive or destructive cyber attacks on state and local infrastructure. While at this time we have no evidence of a comprise or disruption to election infrastructure, blah, 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 or any of these things that we cite out taking place, we will continue to vigilantly monitor any threats to U.S. elections. Yes, so this is my article on the Transition Integrity Project. You can find it on my website, Unlimited Hangout. Bipartisan Washington insiders reveal their plan for chaos if Trump wins the election. It's important to point out that this bipartisan group didn't just reveal a plan for chaos if Trump wins the election. It was how to create chaos under numerous different election scenarios, whether it was a Biden win, a Trump landslide win, or a narrow win for either Biden or Trump. Okay, so like pretty much any scenario that could happen based on vote tallies, they gamed out how to produce chaos from any of those particular scenarios. I focus on the Trump winning one because it's the one that undermines their stated narrative for why they have to simulate and game this stuff out the most. Okay, so with that being said, I'll just start off. So a group of Democratic Party insiders and former Obama and Clinton era officials, as well as a cadre of never Trump neoconservative Republicans, have spent the past few months conducting simulations and war games regarding different 2020 election doomsday scenarios. For several media reports on the group, called the Transition Integrity Project, or TIP, they justify these exercises as specifically preparing for a scenario where President Trump loses the 2020 election and refuses to leave office, potentially resulting in a constitutional crisis. So that's how they frame their reason for existing. However, according to the TIP's own documents, even their simulations involving a clear win, a landslide win for Trump in the upcoming election, resulted in a constitutional crisis, as they predicted the Biden campaign would make bold moves aimed at securing the presidency regardless of the election result. In these war games, the role of Joe Biden was played by John Podesta, who was Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign manager. So that's crazy. Anyway, members of the TIP met in June, but it wasn't publicly reported until July, by the way. They waited a while to make it public that they'd been doing this, okay? They met in June to conduct 4 war games that simulated a, quote, dark 11 weeks. Interesting choice of words considering all the dark winter narrative seeding that we've been seeing. A story for another day. Anyway, a dark 11 weeks between Election Day and Inauguration Day, in which Trump and his Republican allies used every apparatus of government to hold onto power, and Democrats took to the courts and the streets to try and stop it, according to a report from the Boston Globe. But as has been pointed out, and even before I wrote on the TIP, some conservative or pro-Trump media outlets reported on the TIP, but didn't report on the particular scenario I talk about here. But they did note that basically there were calls for Biden not to concede no matter what the election results were, and then Hillary Clinton, not that long after this took place, went on Showtime and gave an interview, and she said, yeah, Biden shouldn't concede, and if we drag this out as long as possible, Biden will eventually win, is essentially what she said. I have the quote and the link to that interview in this article for those that are interested. So moving on, in the TIP's clear Trump win scenario, which is on page 17 of the document I linked to here, this is what the document looks like, the official TIP document. It'll all be in the show notes for those that are interested. Joe Biden, again played by Podesta, who was also chief of staff to Bill Clinton at one point, retracted his election night concession and subsequently convinced 3 states with Democratic governors, which in the exercise were North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Michigan, to ask for recounts. Then the governors of Wisconsin and Michigan sent separate slates of electors to counter those sent by the state legislature to the Electoral College, which Trump had won in an attempt to undermine, if not prevent, that win. So this move here, the first move, flagrantly illegal, and as we'll see in a little bit, they are essentially framing that now in media reports, well after this started to come out, the TIP was revealed in July, they're essentially framing this dueling electors narrative, different electors being sent to the Electoral College by governors, basically undermining the democratic results of their state, that the governors, that they don't like the result, will send a different set of electors, not the ones that the people in their state elected, but the ones the governor choose, they'll send those to the Electoral College to undermine what goes on. So that is definitely a recipe for chaos.
Important to point out that this, I've been seeing this pop up in the discussions of this whole ground zero and where it's all going. And that one of these big discussions, even back to 2016, is that it's been revealed that these electors in the Electoral College ultimately aren't even obligated in many cases to actually go. Yeah. They vote for who they ultimately want to vote for, or and that seems directly contradictory to the idea that we have any influence over the direction. And so that's also another aspect now being tossed in there, that popular vote versus the Electoral College, which could add more, chaos to this as it goes forward. That's already being seeded in the discussion.
Right. Well, I think they want to create chaos in the Electoral College. This is separate from my article, but we've heard ever since 2016, we need to abolish the Electoral College and make it a popular vote system because Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but not the Electoral College. So I think they're definitely based on what these DNC officials and never Trump Republicans and neocons are gaming out here. It's very likely, given especially what the mainstream media is saying now about this whole dueling electors thing, that they'll have a lot of chaos take place among other places in the Electoral College itself as a way to justify its elimination. But anyway, after doing this whole dueling electors thing, the Biden campaign orchestrating that, by the way, per the TIP's own war games, involving top DNC officials that have ties to the Biden campaign. I just want to stress that here. I mean, this is so nuts. The next move they make is even crazier. The Biden campaign then encouraged Western states, particularly California, but also Oregon and Washington, to secede from the United States unless congressional Republicans agreed to a set of quote-unquote structural reforms that were developed with the advice from President Obama. And those reforms are the following: give statehood to Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, which are obviously would be Democrat strongholds. Divide California into 5 states to more accurately represent its population in the Senate. Obviously, California is a supermajority Democrat state, so that would essentially gain the Senate for the Democratic Party for the foreseeable future. Require Supreme Court justices to retire at 70 and eliminate the Electoral College. Like I was just saying, they've been wanting to do this for a long time. So essentially, they're threatening that 3 major states will leave the United States. Remember, secession was what Civil War was all about back in, the American Civil War in the 1800s, and they're setting up a scenario where we'll have these states succeed and potentially create another Civil War type scenario under those same lines, unless you give us these structural reforms that would ensure that Democrats win elections they wouldn't normally win through, something just, it's like mafia tactics here.
Right. So if they don't get what they want to rig the game so they can win later.
Yeah. So as I said before, this group frames themselves as, Trump is a despot and he's authoritarian. So we have to conduct these work games about how to stop him when he tries to become a dictator. That's how they frame this, right? And look at the stuff they're gaming out if they lose. They clearly don't give a flying bleep about democracy. I just want to make that really clear. So, I just sort of pointed that. So basically, these are terms that Republicans would probably never agree to unless they really had, a knife to their throat, basically. So who knows? But anyway, that wasn't even enough for these people in this war game. The Biden campaign, remember this is John Podesta, subsequently provoked a breakdown in the joint session of Congress on January 6th, because remember this is simulating the time between Election Day and Inauguration Day, by getting the House of Representatives to agree to award the presidency to Biden. Okay, so the Biden campaign gets the House of Representatives to agree to award the presidency to Biden, even though he didn't win the election. It was a landslide for Trump. So
Justified because they perceive him to be a despot. Like, again, to your point, that's the most undemocratic thing, but it's only because it's the same way we perceive our foreign policy. They get to break the rules because they're the good guys. That's what it boils down to.
yeah. I mean, that's how they view themselves, right? Well, I mean, if you just think about it, though, this is going slightly off topic, but why do these people hate Trump? Because they always say he's not presidential. He doesn't speak presidentially. He doesn't act like a president. They want another, like, you know, guy like Obama that like can talk really smooth and like be a convincing mask for empire, whereas Trump really ripped that mask off in a lot of ways and embarrassed them. And also he shit talks the media all the time, which they obviously don't like. So anyway, as I said, that was sort of separate. So anyway, this whole breakdown in the session of Congress, they base this on the dueling electors thing, the alternative pro-Biden submissions sent by pro-Biden governors. And then the Republican Party did not consent, obviously, because Trump won the election. And this clear Trump win scenario, per the TIP, who's trying to save democracy from Trump, they create a constitutional crisis when Trump gets a landslide election victory, resulting in no president-elect being inaugurated on January 20th. And it was, they say in their exercise, it's unclear what the military would do in this situation. They obviously included that to sort of hint that the military would have to step in, because why else would you include that? And it makes sense when you look at Rosa Brooks, who's the co-founder of the TIP. There's two co-founders, Rosa Brooks being one of them, and I think she's the most important one, personally. She used to be an advisor to the Trump-era Department of Defense and also the Obama-era State Department when it was headed by Hillary Clinton. She's currently a fellow at the New America think tank. Who funds them, you may ask? Well, let's look at their website. You may see some familiar names, how we're funded, our funding transparency table. Eric Schmidt and Wendy Schmidt. Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, the Rockefeller Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Ford Foundation, the U.S. State Department, the Omidyar Network, Pierre Omidyar, the owner of PayPal Silicon Valley, Jeffrey Skoll, who worked with Pierre Omidyar at eBay and is, also a Silicon Valley billionaire. Reid Hoffman, responsible for the Iowa caucus, Shadow whatever app that created chaos that you were just talking about, and who's also Joe Biden's one of his biggest donors this cycle. J.P. Morgan Chase, Craig Newmark, who we talked a lot about yesterday, another Silicon Valley billionaire originally behind Craigslist. So this is funded by Silicon Valley. And if you read, well, it says it at the top. So we are dedicated to renewing the promise of America, by continuing the quest to realize our nation's highest ideals, honestly confronting the challenges caused by rapid technological and social change, and seizing the opportunities those changes create. This think tank is called New America. Okay, it's funded by Silicon Valley billionaires like Eric Schmidt, who have openly stated they want to remake America, okay, in an authoritarian style. Just look at Eric Schmidt and the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. So they're all about gaming out. This foundation is all about how to seize the opportunities created by the rapid technological and social changes created by Silicon Valley itself, and how to remake society by capitalizing on the changes the people that fund this crap create.
You could also call that order out of chaos.
Yes. Well, that's essentially what they say it is, right? Just kind of crazy. So anyway, that's who the lady that funded the TIP is, tied up with them. 2 weeks after Trump was inaugurated, Rosa Brooks, who created the TIP, wrote in Foreign Policy that one of the ways to remove Trump from office before the 2020 election was a military coup. Okay, so the fact that these people are ending their simulation with a clear Trump win, saying, I wonder what the military would do. Well, just look no further than their co-founder for how that might take place, because he's already on the record saying what the military should do with regards to a Trump presidency. More on Rosa Brooks, as I mentioned earlier, the Pentagon and Hillary Clinton State Department. She was also general counsel to the Open Society Institute, part of the Open Society Foundation, which is funded by George Soros, if you don't know what that is. Zoe Hudson is the TIP's director. She was a senior policy analyst and liaison between the Open Society and foundations in the U.S. government for 11 years, including the period where the Open Society Foundations was involved in the Obama-era coup against Ukraine, Honduras, and other countries. That's just insane. I mean, she was directly involved, this lady, in doing color revolutions in other countries via the U.S. State Department and other parts of, the Obama administration. So basically, the TIP is gaming out a color revolution for the United States. And that is what we're seeing take place to a significant degree, and it's just very alarming. And as I point out here, the Open Society Foundations was involved in numerous color revolutions. I have links here for people that are interested in that, and the ties directly between George Soros and Hillary Clinton that he was directing her policy about unrest in particular countries, telling them how to exploit the unrest in particular nations.
The idea of the color revolution aspect of this is it's developing, in my mind, to be something that's very prominent. We're going to touch on another group as we go forward in the same light. It seems as if all these entities that have nothing to do with elections or COVID-19 are seemingly kind of sticking their fingers in this whole thing and creating what looks like exactly that, a color revolution. It's pretty
right. So, in addition to that, Rosa Brooks is also a scholar at West Point's Modern War Institute, where, what do you know, she focuses on the relationship between the military and domestic policing, and she's also part of Georgetown University's innovative policing program. And she's also a part of the Open Society Foundation-led push. I recommend reading this link here for more information. To capitalize off of legitimate calls for police reform like those you've been seeing this year, to justify the creation of a federalized police force under the guise of defunding and eliminating local police departments. So when you hear about establishment Democrats in different states, governors, mayors, whatever, pushing to defund police departments, a lot of that goes back to this plan to not only federalize police forces, but give police a bunch of high-tech surveillance tools and claim that's reform. I'm hoping to do a report on this in the future, but I have so much going on that it'll be, might be a couple weeks.
This is why you've got people like Biden and Kamala Harris being the people somehow managing to be driving.
But they're the ones promoting
funding police. That's my point. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, if you actually look at the people that are involved with the Biden-Harris like police reform strategies and stuff, it's that same stuff. Federalizing police and giving them a bunch of high-tech tools to police without them actually having to interact with alleged criminals or whatever, so that they don't engage in acts of police brutality. Instead, everything just becomes like super high-tech, right? So that's how they're framing it. I mean, it's messed up. So anyway, I just point out here how the other co-founders, this guy Nils Gilman, used to work for Salesforce, another Silicon Valley company that's actually very closely tied to the World Economic Forum. He now works at something called the Berggruen Institute, where he says he's building, quote, a transnational network of philosophers, technologists, policymakers, i.e. politicians, and artists who are thinking about how artificial intelligence and gene editing are transfiguring what it means to be human. And of course, the Berggruen Institute has ties to people like Eric Schmidt, who also fund New America, and Steve Schwartzman of Blackstone Capital. So, I mean, this is some wild stuff. We have Eric Schmidt here, too. Eric Schmidt, I mean, people hated on Bill Gates a lot over the course of this year. I think I said this in the last video, too, but we really need